These are 10 unexpected flops in the Hobbit draft. Now, unexpected is a bit in the eye of the beholder, but these cards look like they might have some potential, or they might be misleading in how powerful they look like they could be, and then they have been underperformers and are cards you should not be playing outside of very specific circumstances. First up, we have My Precious. For 3 mana, you get a legendary artifact equipment that says, equipped creature has hexproof and can't be blocked. Equip for 2 generic mana and pay 2 life. And then it has the adventure Allure of Power, 1 and a black for an instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards. So generally the play pattern with this is you use Allure of Power at some point when maybe your opponent points a removal spell at your creature, or you have something disposable to sacrifice, draw a couple cards, and then later in the game you have this equipment that you can play, equip to your creature, have kind of a win condition that your opponent can't really interact with. The problem is that this set is pretty quick, and so having an equipment that requires you to pay 2 life and doesn't give a stats boost is just not inherently very useful. Giving your random 2/2s unblockable and hexproof is not going to help you in a racing situation because your opponent is already just going to be attacking you, and so the fact that it doesn't give a stats boost is pretty bad, especially because you have to pay 2 life, so it actually puts you behind in the racing situation by equipping it. And then there's not really a huge benefit from the Allure of Power mode. That just isn't the most strongest rate to cards. Like paying 2 mana for that is a little bit overcosted because you're getting the equipment, but because the equipment is kind of bad, you aren't really happy playing the Allure of Power mode just kind of on its own. So My Precious, generally a card you should not be playing. Next up is Inside Information. It's in a very similar space of why it's bad. X black for a sorcery. Exile the top X cards of target opponent's library. You may play those cards this turn. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its mana value rather than pay its mana cost. Cards that require you to pay life in this format are just very hard to use because you can oftentimes fall behind early in the game if you're on the draw or your opponent has a nice curve out of going 2-drop, 3-drop, or sometimes even 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, that sort of thing. And so the fact that your big finisher might not even be castable because you've taken a lot of damage is a tremendous downside. And as a result, Inside Information is a very difficult card to use because you are not really in control of what your opponent plays. You just have to be aware of the fact that a lot of the time they will be playing fast decks where Inside Information is bad. And so you're not going to have a high life total to be able to cast a bunch of spells from this. Or if you do, you might just find yourself getting defeated on the very next turn because you've paid a bunch of life. Your opponent just needs to get in a couple more points to finish the job. So Inside Information, again, in some formats where the games are slower, this might be a really strong card. But here where the games are a bit quicker, it's not one that you're generally going to be interested in. Next up, the final card in this paying life saga is the Chief Warg. For 2 black-green, you get an uncommon 3/3. It's a legendary wolf. It has Menace and Ferocious. Whenever you attack while you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you draw a card and lose 1 life. This card is inherently pretty weak in the games where you really want your 4-drop to help you stabilize. A 4-mana 3/3 is not a great blocker. The fact that it has Menace, it's sure that does help with the attacking a little bit, but it's only really going to help you in the situations where you're already in a good spot, when you're already attacking, when you already have a big creature in play. And the fact that your 4-drop is not going to help you with your other maybe ferocious cards that you have, where it's not going to be the 4-powered creature that you need to help trigger those things, is pretty big downside. And the life loss can add up. There can be situations where you're in kind of a close game and it's like, okay, the Chief Warg is only helping me if I'm able to attack, but that attack will cost me a little bit of life, and it involves attacking, which means I will not have as many blockers available to me. So in some situations where maybe you're at 7 life, you can't really afford to attack because you have to pay the life, and even though you're drawing that card, you've lost one of your blockers temporarily, which can be pretty devastating. And so the Chief Warg is, again, a card that black-green can be a good color combination, but you want to have the Chief Warg as a card that you're not really taking very highly and oftentimes not going to want to play because it's not going to help you in the situations where you most need the help from your 4-drops, and there's just better cards you can play in that slot that will help you much more on the defensive end of things while still being good when you are in those spots where you have a good attacker and have big creatures and stuff like that. Next up is Orcrist, Goblin Cleaver. For 3 mana, you get a legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has trample. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, choose a creature type, create a treasure token for each creature you control of that type, and then equip for 3 generic mana. This is the sort of card that when you see it, in the case of many players, when you see this card, it's skewed by the fact that you see it being a mythic rare. I see this is like a trap of card evaluation that happens all the time, where they put a card at mythic rare because it's going to be good somewhere else. In the case of Orcrist, this is a card that is kind of built for commander, so they put it into the mythic rare slot so that it won't impact games of draft too much, and you can kind of safely ignore it in draft. But a lot of the times the mythic rare equipment is going to be a card that's like really, really good in draft. And so the inherent mind like calculation is, oh, mythic rare equipment, I want to put this card in my deck. It's colorless. I can play this everywhere. But if you just saw this card and it had like a rarity symbol of a common, it'd be much more easy to evaluate this as being, oh my gosh, I have to pay 3 mana to play it, 3 more mana to equip, and all I get is +2/+2 in stats and trample. You're not going to have enough creatures of one type for that treasure token part to really be that relevant almost any percentage of the time. And so generally this is the sort of card that can teach a valuable lesson about card evaluations and things like that, where reading it is like, okay, this card looks really spectacular for my commander deck, so maybe it'll be good in draft, or oh, this card is a mythic rare equipment, it's a mythic rare colorless card, I want to take this early. But then just be careful about evaluating the rarity of the card as part of the card itself, because Orcrist Goblin Cleaver is quite weak in draft. It's going to hurt your chances of winning when you play it, generally speaking, and you should be leaving it on the sidelines almost every time. Next up is Desert Wereworm. For 4 red, it's a 0/5 dragon worm, but it gets +2/+0 for each mountain you control. Whenever you attack with creatures with power 12 or greater for the first time each turn, untap all attacking creatures. After this phase, there is an additional combat phase. So if you play this in a deck that's like red plus another color, if you have like 3 mountains when you play this, it's a 6/5, and then if you have a couple other creatures or you play another mountain and it gets bigger, you can kind of get like 2 attack phases with Desert Wereworm. And so it's easy to live in this magical Christmas land scenario where you think, oh, I'm going to play Desert Wereworm, I'm going to attack them the following turn, untap all my creatures, attack them again, the game's just going to be over, it's not going to go very well. However, the way Desert Wereworm almost always ends up playing out is your opponent has something like Ravening Warg in play, which is like a 2-mana Death Toucher, and all of a sudden your Desert Wereworm just looks at it like, okay, I just spent 6 mana for this creature, and they have a Death Toucher. And there's a couple of Death Touchers in the format. The removal also lines up pretty well with it, like Magnificent End is a common white removal spell, and it deals 5 damage to target creature, often for 2 mana if the creature's tapped, and Desert Wereworm conveniently has only 5 toughness. So it just gets kind of wrecked by Death Touch creatures, kind of wrecked by a lot of the common interaction spells. It doesn't inherently provide value when it comes into play. It's just kind of like a generic kind of big creature that kind of has to attack to get its value, and there's just a lot of ways for that to get punished, not disregarding the fact even where like sometimes you just play this card and then your opponent just kills it, like, which is often going to happen in this set. I guess I already kind of mentioned that with Magnificent End, but sometimes they kill it before you even get to attack with it or even have the chance of things. Or sometimes you just have a weird draw and you're playing a black-red deck and you draw your Desert Wereworm with like 4 swamps, 2 mountains, and you have like a 4/5 for 6 mana, and that's like pretty horrific as well. So Desert Wereworm, again, it's easy to kind of get stuck in this like living the dream moment, but it's not a card that you should be playing. Next up is Part in Friendship. For 4 and a green, it's an enchantment. It says whenever a non-token creature you control dies, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. If its mana value is less than or equal to the number of lands you control, put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This ability triggers only once each turn. This card looks like it might be powerful. You have your 5 mana enchantment in play. Anytime your creatures die, you get replacement creatures. That could be pretty powerful, especially if there were some sacrifice synergies in this set, where you play your Part in Friendship and you have direct control over your creatures dying, things of that nature. And all of a sudden, your opponent can't really stop you from getting value because you play your creature, you're going to be playing like a sacrifice deck where it's themed around this. You sack your creature, get something else, get some value from the sacrifice, all of that sort of stuff. But there aren't really sacrifice outlets in this format, not really like enough of them to make Part in Friendship good on that axis. And it also just lines up pretty poorly in many cases because many times the green decks are the ones trying to go a little bit bigger. And so you play your 5 mana enchantment and you have like 1 creature in play, and then your opponent deals with that creature with something like a Pinecone Strike, which exiles it and prevents the Part in Friendship from working. So that's a really big factor, and seeing how the answers line up to the cards actually matters a great deal. In blue, there's also things like Enchanted River's Grasp, which remove blockers without actually killing them. And so if you spend 5 mana for Part in Friendship, you have like 1 blocker, you feel pretty safe because if they kill the blocker, you'll get something else probably. Well, then they kill it with Enchanted River's Grasp. You don't get anything from your Part in Friendship. You spent 5 mana not affecting the board state. Your opponent can kind of snowball from there, and that's a pretty big downside for a card like Part in Friendship. And as a result, it's a card you should not be playing. Not enough synergy, and the answers line up really well against it for some of the decks you'll be facing. Next up is Fearsome Goblin Pair. For 2 black-red hybrid, you get a 1/1 Goblin Soldier, and says when this creature dies, amass Goblins 4. Now, this card is kind of inherently, you think of it, okay, it's a 1/1 that dies into 4/4 worth of stats. That has some potential, and so it immediately kind of starts thinking, okay, are there a lot of sacrifice outlets in this, like sacrifice outlets in the set, so that I can get my 1/1 into a 4/4 while getting some other value? There's not really a ton of ways to sacrifice your creatures, as I already just mentioned with the green card we just looked at, and so Fearsome Goblin Pair kind of suffers on that axis. Also, black-red decks are trying to be proactive in this format generally, and so a lot of the times, if you're trying to assemble a like aggressive aggressive curve of going like 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, attacking your opponent, pressuring their life total, leveraging your removal spells effectively. If part of your curve is playing Fearsome Goblin Pair, you just give your opponent a ton of time to stabilize and recover, because instead of playing like an aggressive 2-drop into an aggressive 3-drop into an aggressive 4-drop or something like that, you've played a 1/1 on turn 3 and your opponent can kind of safely ignore it. Sure, you might attack them with it a couple of times. They're not going to block it. They'll just take 1 damage instead of like maybe if you played a 3/3 or something like that, they take a lot more damage over the course of several turns. And overall, on the defensive front, Fearsome Goblin Pair can help you with your blocking and things of that nature, but sometimes on the defensive front too, they have a Pinecone Strike, and this single card in the format, especially because it's a smaller set, so each of the individual cards gets seen a bit more, this one card makes a big difference in how good Fearsome Goblin Pair can be, because you spend Fearsome Goblin Pair hoping to block, hoping to get this 4/4 worth of stats, and then your opponent just Pinecone Strikes you and sends you back to the Stone Age to some degree. There's also the situations where you have your Fearsome Goblin Pair, you chump block with it, get the 4/4 worth of stats, but because you already have an existing army, the stats go onto that army, and your opponent's just been saving a removal spell to point to that army anyway, and so you get those extra stats onto the same creature that they were already going to kill, and so you don't get a huge benefit from that anyway, because maybe they had a like 3-mana kill spell that was going to kill your army anyway, and so that can end up pretty badly for you as well. So Fearsome Goblin Pair, again, it's a card that's not going to really do what you want it to do, so it's oftentimes best avoided. Next up is Riddles in the Dark. For 2 and a blue, it's an instant. It says look at the top 4 cards of your library and separate them into a face down pile and a face up pile. An opponent chooses one of the piles, put that pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. Now, one of the things about these sorts of cards is there's like a lineage of cards like this, and some of them going back to Fact or Fiction. Fact or Fiction was like a very powerful card back in the early days of Magic, and so seeing this sort of card immediately makes some players think of powerful cards from the past, and it does look like, okay, you're going to get to make some sort of piles, you're going to get 2 cards from your 3-mana card draw spell, there's some kind of weird decisions going on here, but the problem with this card is because your opponent chooses which pile goes into your hand, you're oftentimes not going to be able to get your best cards once you get to a late game scenario. So imagine you have your Riddles in the Dark, you really need to find a removal spell for your opponent's like card. What happens is you play Riddles in the Dark, and then they like you separate them into 2 piles. One of the piles would have the removal spell you need, and your opponent just gets to look at the face-up pile, see, oh, is there a removal spell in that pile? Well, there's not a removal spell in that pile, I'll give them the face-up pile. Or, oh, there's a removal spell in the face-up pile, I'll just give them the face-down pile. You can't really always get the cards that you need, and in late-game situations, when you have your card draw spell and you really just don't want to find lands can be kind of useless, and so you just end up in a situation where it's like, okay, do I put the lands in the face-up pile? I mean, they don't really matter. It's like, I might find only 1 card off this, because you often want to split into 2 piles and 2 piles, and it's like, okay, what's my opponent going to give me? Like, because they have the choice, they're oftentimes going to be able to wreck you with that and make sure that you don't get what you need or give you something that's suboptimal. Whereas just other card draw spells in the set available like common, you just get to draw a couple of cards and you just get to have those cards. You don't have to worry about your opponent making good choices to make you end up with not what you need. So Riddles in the Dark, again, a card best avoided. Next up is Troop of Ponies. For 2 colorless mana, it's a 2/1 horse. It has 2 tap, sacrifice this creature, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal them, put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand, then shuffle. This uncommon would be much better in other formats. There are formats where you care about having mana fixing, you care about maybe splashing multiple colors, which Troop of Ponies is great at because it can get 2 different basic lands. So maybe you're playing like a black-green deck splashing red and blue. Troop of Ponies can kind of do all of that for you. This is not one of those formats. This is kind of an aggressive format. And in an aggressive format, you don't want to be spending your turn 2 playing a card that you then plan on like sacrificing on turn 3 because it just puts you so far behind on board. If you are going to be playing your 2-drop and then planning on spending a future turn spending more of your mana not affecting the board by removing your own board state just to get some lands, that's not really where you want to be. A 2/1 stat line isn't the best. It just doesn't, it's like a 2/1 is like pretty much like the bare minimum as far as stats that you can like expect to get for your 2-drops. And the fact that it like the land, the fixing, you're not really playing these super splashy decks, all of these kind of factors combined to be like Troop of Ponies. Some formats might be just the card you're looking for your splashy late game deck in a slow format where both players are trying to play these grindy cards. This is not one of those formats. This is a format where your opponent plays a 2-mana 2/1 menace against you in some games, and you're just getting hit over and over and over, and you can't afford to be sacrificing your own 2-drops. You want to be trading with them or doing stuff like that, and Troop of Ponies is not going to help you in those scenarios, and you often won't even have the time to activate its ability. Next up, we have Radagast of Rosgabel. For 2 green, you get a 2/5 Avatar Wizard. The first creature spell you cast each turn costs 2 less to cast and can be cast as though it had flash. So it's a 4-mana 2/5, but it has this kind of mana discount ability for your bigger creatures or any of your creatures that you can then flash them in. You can get some discounts, things like that. Oftentimes, the way that you build your decks in this format inherently makes Radagast weaker because you don't have room for that many expensive cards at the top end of your curve, because you need to be interacting so heavily with the early stages of the mana curve because of these fast starts other decks can have. So you play Radagast and maybe you have a couple of 6-drops in your deck. You have like a couple of 5-drops in your deck. And so the cards that you would be making big discounts with on Radagast, you might oftentimes not even have one of them in your hand. And Radagast just ends up being a 4-mana 2/5, which just isn't a good stat line really. And it's even double green. So sometimes it's even hard to cast in your 2-color deck where you have like a game where you draw 3 islands, 1 forest, and can't even cast your Radagast. And if you top deck him, he's pretty much going to be a 4-mana 2/5 because you don't have any more creatures in your hand. And the like threat of like your opponent being able to like have to worry about you flashing a big creature into play, that's sometimes going to happen, but oftentimes you were just going to play that big creature on your turn anyway, so they weren't going to attack. So your opponent like not attacking you out of fear, maybe that'll buy you 1 turn sometimes, but oftentimes it won't even buy you a turn because they have like a removal spell at the ready anyway. So you flash in your creature, they kill it anyway at instant speed. It's not really like a big deal for them, and Radagast just kind of sits there as being kind of like an understated creature. This is a format where you want to have good stats for your cards. You want cards to do something when they come into play if they are going to be a more expensive card, and especially as a more expensive card, be a good top deck because you only have room for so many expensive cards in your deck. And if you're spending a card, your like 4-mana slot on a card that's like going to only be situationally good in the early turns and not going to be a good top deck later, that's not really going to be where you want to have your 4-drops concentrated. So Radagast as overall, it's the sort of card that looks really flashy. You can imagine scenarios where it could be good for you, but those scenarios are oftentimes not going to come up the way you might expect, due partly to the nature of the format and partly just to the way the card ends up working out in games of limited with the way you build your decks. Oh, that was the final card. Thank you so much for watching. I forgot myself there. If you made it to the end, leave hashtag 10flops in the comment section down below. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you next time.